So it's so great to be here. Yanni's in the crowd. Good to see you. Sorry. Her name's Laurel. Did anybody else catch the joke? Okay. So I don't know how actually best to do this. I'll actually invite all of my guests to come up so that we can get this started, and then we'll do introductions and get to it. But the point of this panel is on the security landscape, everything from go-to-market as well as just what is happening out there in the ecosystem. And what's really nice about this is that we have a wealth of different backgrounds here on stage. And I'll go through the process of introducing everybody, but it's important to see it both from the operator's experience, from an analyst experience, as well as from the actual startup founder experience. So to get started, on my right, I have Kelly Shortridge, who is currently product manager over at Security Scorecard, which is another New York City security company. So it's good to see that breadth here in the city. And also, she has an amazing background. Used to be at BAE Systems, as well as used to be in investment banking. Knows a lot about the space, and also writes a very funny yet very informative newsletter. So maybe some of you have been able to read it. If not, maybe she'll let you read it one of these days. Next to her, we have Liz Maida, who's the CEO and co-founder of UpLevel Security, one of our portfolio companies here at Workbench. And I'm going to let her introduce her company later on during the program, but it's hopefully you guys get some nuggets on what it's like to be a founder building a company in this space. And on the far end, we have Kylie Watson from Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corp. She's a CISO over there and has had a long stretch of being a security leader, and she's awesome. Anyways, the way that we like to start these things is with an icebreaker, and I'm pretty bad at these, so I thought maybe I'd ask, like, what's your favorite icebreaker as the icebreaker? But my colleague said that the best one would be, if you weren't in security, what would you be doing as a job?
That's a great question. I think I would probably be trying to do something in world building, either writing a novel or working on a video game. This is going to be a slightly weird answer.
Computational biology applied to cancer research. I have no background in that, but it sounds very interesting.
Does this work? Did I turn it on? Can you hear me? Can you hear me anyway? Yeah, right? Okay. So I also have no background in this, but I would love to be a neuroscientist, and in particular, focusing on the intersection of cybersecurity, nanotechnology, developments in medical science, and neuroscience. All of that. That's what I'd like to do. Otherwise, it's
I like that. Dreaming big. My answer was I'll open a coffee shop, but I thought mine would be the best. But keep an eye on me. I actually made it one of the days. To start, I'm gonna
be a sound engineer, that's for sure.
I'm gonna start this one with Liz. If you could start with just a quick 30-second pitch on UpLevel, so everybody can know what you do. But then also, how has go-to-market been for UpLevel? What works, what doesn't, and can you share any specific tactics or strategies that have been useful for you at UpLevel?
Sure, absolutely. So very high level, we're a cybersecurity data analysis company. We're applying graph theory and machine learning to historical security data to help correlate and prioritize events. I would say, in terms of go-to-market, just within the security space in general, one of the biggest challenges is there are just so many security companies that are saying the exact same thing regardless of what they actually do. And so there's this aspect of this that I think ultimately, in order to be successful, you have to be authentic and you have to be willing to actually expose the details of your technology if that is truly your differentiator, and be forthcoming about the details instead of trying to kind of almost confuse your audience as to what you're doing. Be very upfront of, here's what we're doing, here's what our vision is, here's where we are today and how we plan on getting there. Because otherwise it's almost impossible in the multitude of security companies that are out there to even understand what's real and what's not, and like, is this interesting or not, and then be honest about like, not every company is going to be a great fit as a customer, and that's okay.
Well, I love that answer, and that tees up very well. It seems like you know the questions.
Not at all.
For the next one, that I'm going to pass it on to Kelly. So Kelly writes this great newsletter about all the different fun days and activity that's happened on the deal side in the startup ecosystem. So Kelly, after looking at the startup landscape, what have you found to be the best companies that you've seen? How did they break through the noise in this very fragmented yet saturated marketplace?
Yeah, for sure. It's actually going to be somewhat similar to Liz's answer. If you haven't seen it, I created this bingo card that's InfoSec Startup Bingo, and it's all about the buzzwords that are used. So you can take it to like a conference and then see like how many times machine learning's hit, or prioritization, or thwart, like all those things like that. I think the problem is, as Liz said, like it's just a bunch of buzzword soup, and you aren't explaining how you're actually helping the customer. You're explaining the technology. You're not explaining how it actually like improves workflows or actually benefits them. And it's a little confusing because most of the companies are doing this. So as a customer, I would have no idea where to begin determining what's right for me, because just saying machine learning for security doesn't really tell me like how you're helping me. So I think having transparency is a key part of it. The other thing you'll see, particularly for a lot of the detection companies, is when they're pitching to customers or doing a proof of concept, they'll give their own data set for you to run, their tool upon, and that's obviously not the same as your environment. You need to be testing it for your own environment. One way to really freak out a sales engineer at a security company is by saying, hey, let's use this data set instead to test it. So that's, if you want to see someone panic, that's a really good way to do it. But ultimately, as Liz said, like if you're upfront, if you're saying, yeah, just run it in your environment, no problems, like being upfront about false positive rates, things like that, ultimately you're going to create more trust with the customer and you are going to stand apart.
I like that. What I think about alphabet soup is that it's good for kids, but it has no nutritional value. I still eat it though. I don't know why. Kylie, you are a buyer of these technologies at times. What makes these startups that pitch you stand out, and what is your perspective on the emerging technology landscape?
Yeah, so I think total agreement. We do hear a lot of the same things over and over and over again. And, we dig into those questions. What is the problem you're really trying to solve? Can you articulate that clearly to me, right? Not what is the problem that someone maybe at JP Morgan wanted you to solve. Maybe that is, I don't know. But what is the whole point of you being here talking to me? And the worst, what I hate most is when people come in and say, tell me, what is your problem? What is the biggest problem you have? What are you trying to solve? And I'll explain a few things to them and they'll be like, oh, wow, I can do blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, you can't. You have no idea what my problem really is or what kind of solutions I'm looking for. And I think there's an incredible lack of curiosity once people get into the sales stage, if you like, right? So in the beginning, people, they'll want to know, what do all the CISOs talk about when they get together in their little CISO clubs? And we have those, by the way. and we do invite other people to them as well. But we talk a lot about, how do we get people that we want to work with and co-develop products with and do, validation and research and whatever with. How do we get them to understand what it is that we're really trying to do? And it was a pretty earth-shattering comment, wasn't it? And that's, and then when you've decided what it is what problem you're solving, and you tell us what it is, and we say, oh, well, actually, I'm trying to solve this other problem, don't tell us that you can solve that problem too, then you turn around and say, well, my product doesn't do that. We might consider that next time, would you like to work with us to develop it? But we know, when you say that you can do something you can't, we know. But just use a great word, I just want to say one thing about that, trust, right? It's a partnership. If I trust my vendor, whatever, whether they're new startups or old, boring companies like IBM or whatever, right? When you trust your partners, then you work well together regardless.
Not SAP. She loves SAP.
Love SAP. Love them.
So this is for all three of you. What are the future opportunities for entrepreneurs out here to tackle? And I know that Kelly's over on Security Scorecard and Liz is at Up Level, so feel free to talk about your own startups or just stuff that you just believe are the next big opportunity.
Yeah, so I think one area, and my company does a little of this, is really looking at how you can start bringing security tooling to people outside of the security function. Ultimately, security teams are extremely resource strapped, and a lot of times the best benefit of security is not actually in security workflows. It's making sure that security is seamless into other people's workflows, particularly when you consider that oftentimes what people are trying to protect is customer data. Who interacts with the customer data every day? It's not the security people, it's salespeople or marketing or whomever else. So really looking at tooling that's easy enough for people who don't have security backgrounds to actually use and to benefit from it, I think is huge. I think we're going to see, or hopefully see, more technologies that are integrating into developer workflows better and kind of orchestrating security tools on the back end so that, again, you're kind of like adding a layer of abstraction away from the actual security underpinnings in a way that people can actually benefit. Because I think for the most part, no one wants to actually worry about security, but if you can have security in a way that doesn't interfere, that's better. So I'm hoping we see fewer of the solutions that are just adding complexity and adding work and adding maintenance time and things that are actually help streamline workflows across the organization.
Yeah, and so I guess from my perspective, I mean, I think there's a fundamental challenge and problem in terms of the underlying security data infrastructure that is in place within a lot of organizations, because in many ways, like the way the security kind of infrastructure has evolved in a lot of enterprises is people have gone out and bought a lot of tools for detection and prevention and deployed them across their network and their endpoints, and they're like, oh, these are generating all this data, and like, how do we actually collect all this data? And so they aggregate all this data, and then all of a sudden they're now at this point where they're like, I have all this data, and like, what am I doing with it, right? And I mean, that's part of what we focus on. I think there's a lot of different ways. It's a very big problem, but I think it does require just like a foundational shift in thinking about what are you actually trying to do from a security infrastructure perspective, right? You're aggregating this, you're trying to understand the attack vectors. Ideally, your security infrastructure is becoming more intelligent over time with every attack that you experience. How do you design an infrastructure to support that and to do that analysis that isn't rooted in this mechanism of individual analysts writing the right queries to figure out what's actually going on? And so I think in many ways, just fundamentally, the way people think about the security devices that are deployed throughout their organization, how their infrastructure is actually architected, really should ideally shift over time. And part of that requires really, and ultimately this idea of like there has to be interoperability across all of these devices. Like no single vendor is going to own all of the security infrastructure, and that's okay. Like that's actually a good thing. It allows people to focus on the things that they do best.
Yes.
Keep trying to give this to you. Just take it.
I know. Well, I'm not sure this will ever come out of my hair anyway, so you might be hearing from me for a long time. So I went to a conference the other day, and it was early in the morning, so I wasn't really paying attention. But the keynote speaker was talking about patching, vulnerability. Like really? I mean, are we still not able to do patching? And I was kind of like, I mustn't have had enough coffee because this cannot be the keynote for this session. But we had a little get together recently, and this idea of the basics keeps coming up, and it's for exactly this reason that we have all of these, core sort of security hygiene platforms and products in place. They've been there 10, 12, 15 years, same processes, repeat, as the organizations grow, you do the same thing. What changes? Maybe the regulation changes, maybe the threat changes, maybe we say, well, you know what, you used to have 4 weeks to patch, now you've got 4 days, get on with it, right? But the fundamental idea of these core controls hasn't changed. And I stole this from someone, I'll remember who it was and is and give them proper attribution at some point, but it's this concept, I have it on a whiteboard behind my desk so my team can see it, is you can't solve tomorrow's problems with yesterday's thinking. We run the whole security platform based on yesterday's thinking to solve problems we had 10 years ago. Doesn't work anymore, doesn't scale, and it certainly isn't going to address any of the problems of the future. So there are sort of two big camps of things that we need to be looking at. The core basic hygiene of the environment. How do you build security in from the beginning? And the other thing, I had a vendor come in years ago, drew something on the board where it had, security at one end and efficiency at the other end or something. I'm like, well, that's bullshit. We don't want to do that, right? The securest thing should be the easiest thing. The path of least resistance should lead you to the most secure option. It shouldn't be something extra, shouldn't be an add-on. And I think when you focus on, we have a lot of conversations around machine learning and AI and all kinds of, it's great, it's all very useful, we'll need all that good stuff, but there's great opportunity out there just in, housekeeping and core hygiene, I guess. Yeah.
Definitely. How many people in the room are security folks? All right, see a couple hands. So the next question is, what is security?
It's catching, I told you.
Right? Actually, the next question is for the security folks in the room as well as just enterprise technology folks who know how long the sales cycle can be and even just evaluating new and emerging technology, how can you do it? How can large enterprises do it? So the next question is, how can startups and enterprises partner together to sandbox and test security technologies, which oftentimes are sensitive information about sensitive information?
I think, and I'm actually going through this right now with one of the things on my roadmap, or projects on my roadmap, is that if you're really hitting on a pain point that's maybe even a little ambitious for solving, I can promise you that even the large company, like you, particularly in security, you'd be shocked at how much is still done in Excel spreadsheets. It's just like you're improving upon Excel spreadsheets, which isn't that big of a hurdle. But if you're really solving a real pain point, not just like detecting, but machine learning, then companies are more likely to want to work with you and really partner with you, share that data, because they want to see more solutions in the market. Particularly there, as she was talking about, like their CISO clubs, they're ones specific to industries, healthcare, financial services. If you're able to really connect with one of those customers in one of those industries, then there's kind of like this network effect. They'll introduce you to people in your industry. In their industry, they'll really talk through the problem there, so you're expanding your potential market reach. So I think it really is, not saying, oh, we can solve it. It's saying like, listen, we're thinking about doing this. We aren't quite there yet. How have you been doing it? Can we partner and talk it through with you? Again, it kind of goes back to the trust.
Yeah, and I would say, so, especially from the startup perspective of being flexible and understanding the constraints under which the enterprise is working, right? It's like everybody in the ideal world is offering fully, cloud-based hosted solutions. The reality is, for a whole set of organizations, that's just not feasible, and it has nothing to do with whether the security organization that you're working with wouldn't prefer to do that. Like oftentimes they would greatly prefer to do that, but for CapEx versus OpEx reasons, or just security controls, or just the nature of how they would get the data to you, they can't do that. And so instead of trying to fight against that and try and convince them they should be doing something a different way, which they probably already bought into themselves and prefer to do, understanding what are the constraints under which you have to work, and let's see how we can be flexible and work within those constraints on your behalf.
Absolutely. And the thing I wrote down when I was thinking about how to respond to this question is don't be vague. Right? Be very, very specific. Again, back to the what is the problem you're solving, how can you solve it, and then the partnership, which has already been mentioned. Work together and say, how do we make this work for you, right? Every customer is different. We all have different risk tolerances and risk appetites, and we all have different technology environments, and some of them have very nice labs, some of us don't. Some of us have very strict controls around how much data, real data we can use in testing in lab environments. Some of us don't. It's all very different. So, have a real conversation, very specific, not vague. What are the objectives? What is the time frame? What do you expect from us? What can we get from you? I've literally had people come in and say to me, well, I'm going to send you a guy, and I'll need 3 of your people, and you need to stand up this, and you need to say, wait, what? Like, that's not how it works, right? It's got to be a partnership. You've got to figure it out together and be very specific about the things you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, just to add to that from the startup perspective, I mean, like being very respectful of your prospects' time, right? Like they have a lot of other stuff going on, and thinking as much as possible about what can you do that offloads some of the burden from them, right?
Awesome. How are we on time?
Open up for questions.
All right. Gonna have to open up for questions, but love to have the responses. George.
So this question is for the entire panel, but it was sparked by something Kelly said later. Kelly talked about how security teams have limited resources. How they talked about how, are we still worried about patching? The first thing I thought was Equifax. So yes, we're still worried about patching. But the thing that I would love to hear your take on is, what do we do about the human factor, right? No one in this room would fall for a spear phishing attack, but what about our parents, our siblings, or cousins? What are your thoughts about that, considering technology permeates our lives? Security is at the forefront of everything we do.
I think fundamentally you have to design systems with resilience in mind, and I've talked about this a bit, but like if a user clicking on a .pdf, .exe, whatever, is gonna completely like make your system fall down, you're not resilient, you're not even really robust. So I think fundamentally, if you aren't able to adapt to things like that, like you weren't doing security right, as far as actual tooling, I think it's also threat prioritization. So this also brings in a bit of the human element. People tend to kind of overweight how much 0 days are actually used on their organization, and ignoring the fact that, again, users are going to click remarkable things that none of us would ever expect them to click. And so you really have to be prioritizing that and figure out, where does your first $1 million of the budget go? It should go to things like combating business, compromise, things like that. So then it also goes to the fact that if you have tons of data, like how many times have we heard that, so-and-so was breached and they were alerted, they just didn't notice it in their sea of alerts. So you have to be able to figure out like how to bring the signal out of the noise and not just keep accumulating data and actually like be able to digest it.
All right. Jess. Wait, are you Jess? Are you raising your hand?
I am raising my
You won't
hand.
mind.
I know we have a great audience of enterprise startups here tonight, and many of whom are thinking, how do you break through that noise when it's a crowded category, when there are many other companies that might sound like you on marketing on paper? So I'd be curious, many of the panelists, what is an example of a security company that you think has done well to break through the noise from a positioning or messaging or marketing perspective, and how do they do that?
We need names.
So, the reality is, I never hear from any of you, ever. The way I find companies is through my peer group. I ask my friends, my fellow CISOs at other companies, have you seen anybody lately? Have you heard from anybody lately? I have some people that very kindly go out into the market and try and find companies that I might be interested in knowing more about. But there is a huge, it's like we're all on different dating sites, It's like you've got your profiles up somewhere and I'm looking for loves on some other place where you all aren't, right? So I don't know how we fix that. There's a lot of great companies out there, and I have, I think, 3 or 4 different people that go out and scour the market, different parts of the country, and also in Japan and also in Europe. But honestly, mostly what they bring me are relatively mature companies already. So, I don't know what the answer to that is, but I don't hear from you. Please be my friend. Well, Kelly, he called me today. It's like, would you come have a chat with me? It's like, oh, now I can have a chat with you? Yes. Now I'm doing something for you, so thanks.
I appreciate it, Nick. I
think also looking at, for example, RSA is the biggest security conference that has this massive vendor hall. It was interesting, there were probably, 20 or more announcements kind of like the week to week and a half before RSA, 0 the week after. So you have to wonder, is RSA really about the customers, or is it about kind of the hype and venture capitalists showing off their investments? I think a lot of what I see in the market is that people are just trying to, raise the bigger rounds, like look sexier, frankly, rather than, again, deeply focusing on the customer problem. There are some companies I know that haven't raised VC funding and are extremely loved by their customers because they've developed those trustful relationships because they're focused on actually building a product that security people love and enjoy, rather than focused on how can we appear like we're smashing boundaries and disrupting everything and machine learning, AI, whatever. Like they're focused on, are we actually helping customers? Which I know sounds super obvious, but you'd be shocked at the amount of unusable software in the security space. Where they're like, well, why do we need UX? Like, who cares? Why can't you use this Java app from 2006 looking thing?
So it's actually, to that point, it's actually been fascinating from the startup perspective about the degree to which customers are kind of really intrigued from the UX UI perspective, and the number one thing that they want to do is test it within their environment. And for a long time, we're why do you care so much about integrating with your own data sources? The result is going to be the same with these sample data sources, but it is very much because they've had so many scenarios where things have not worked, right? And so I think in many ways as a startup, you have to almost choose your path of which way are you going, right? Do you want to take the pure marketing route? And that's a very different path in terms of the fight you have to go down, right? In terms of differentiating with a high-level marketing perspective versus going down the path of, let me actually figure out what product I have to build and what functionality I have to build. And honestly, some of that functionality may not be super sexy or interesting, but it's the actual functionality that's required to get a product to work within an enterprise environment.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more, right? So I'm going to pass it on to this side of the room because last time I did a panel, I only looked at one side. So.
Yeah, this question is for Kylie. Thanks for your comments about batching and security hygiene. But I started working in product security, and I fully agree with the security hygiene basics that you mentioned. But considering patching, one of the things that we can consistently come across is organizations need to build extra features out of a common system like Nginx or Apache or something like this. And adding these extra features means that then patching ends up falling behind consistently because they can't update because they don't support these features. And it just becomes a cycle in many organizations. Do you have any views on how to solve that, or how to prioritize and make sure that hygiene, like patching, can overcome these kind of problems?
Can you just repeat the question?
Oh yeah, so basically I want product security.
Patching. He wants to know about patching. But it was a very good question in that, there are your core, operating system patches. Everybody should have that down. But you have products and solutions that are often combinations of lots of different bits and pieces that all have different patching cycles. And it's a very, very common scenario where there is a piece of code that is running, maybe supporting a critical business process, and a new patch is released for the platform that software is running on. It's not compatible. So what do you do? What do you do? It's a challenge constantly, right? So, you try and test. I mean, just if depending upon the risk appetite of the company, they may say that they'll accept that risk, that it remains unpatched, and put other compensating controls around that risk area to protect it. Or they'll say, well, it's not supported by the vendor, but we'll test it anyway, see if it works. If it works, we'll go with that. It really depends on the organization. But I think what's happening now is, there's so many things that we don't know about. There are vulnerabilities in every single thing that we use every day in our organization. We don't even know they're there. We don't even know if they're being exploited. So this idea that you can patch everything, it's just not possible. And so a lot more work has to be done around, isolation, segmentation, other types of protections, automated responses to things that look like they're going a bit wonky, because you can't patch everything. Literally, you cannot. So, is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. So with that, thank you to our panelists. Awesome responses.